Hola a todos, ¿cómo están? Yo estoy muy bien hoy y gracias por estar aquí. Today we're going to talk about el tiempo presente, the present tense of AR verbs, okay? So let's go ahead and get into a few things. Now, in languages, and in Spanish specifically, there are three moods that we use to speak, okay? So first we have the indicative mood. And this is used to indicate something you believe to be true. So anything you say as fact, this is most of the speech that occurs in a language is in the indicative tense, right? You are indicating something you believe to be true. Okay, now this is going to be all the tenses we will learn will be in the indicative mood. Okay, now we also have the subjunctive mood, and that's when you're wanting to influence someone else, or you are speaking in the hypothetical, or you're not sure about something. And that doesn't get into our classes until 2201, but it's another mood. So if you were to say, I wish he were here, right? You're trying to wish or cause something to happen. You're trying to influence something. So that's the subjunctive. Okay. And then we also have the imperative mood. If something is imperative for you to do, then you will, it's like a command, right? It's say, go here, do your homework, right? That is the imperative mood. So we also have that in Spanish. But primarily in this course, we'll be in the indicative mood when we're indicating something. So we've looked at some of the present tense so far, but you also have the preterite tense, you have the imperfect tense, you have the present perfect tense, any of the perfect tenses. But today we're just going to be focusing on the present tense, right? Saying I play baseball, or I study Spanish, right? Okay, so we're going to learn the different conjugations that are based around the present indicative tense, okay? So let me go ahead and share the PowerPoint with you guys. Okay, here we go. So now, in order to talk about activities, okay, or to do anything we're doing, we need to use verbs, right? So those are our infinitives, our things that end in AR, ER, and IR. But today we're going to be focusing on the AR verbs, okay? And verbs, what they do, they express actions or states of being, right? We looked at states of being with the verb ser, I am from, or I am a professor, right? Yo soy profesor, yo soy de Georgia, ¿no? Muy bien. So in English and in Spanish, the infinitive is the base form of the verb, right? Those AR, ER, and IR endings, okay? And that's talking about to write, to eat, to study. So those are infinitives in English. Anything ending in AR, ER, and IR verbs is our infinitive in Spanish, okay? And that's the base form of the verb. Now in English, the infinitive is preceded by the word to, right? To study, to be, to eat. And in Spanish, it is a one-word form, right? It's a compound form in English, but it is a one-word form in Spanish. And you can see those, you can recognize them by their AR, ER, IR endings. That does not mean to say there are some nouns that are with an AR, ER, or IR ending. But typically when you do see something ending in AR, ER, IR, then you are going to be looking at an infinitive, okay? Now, so we're going to learn the forms of our regular AR verbs. And it's very important that you guys memorize this kind of structure, this conjugation chart. Typically, they're going to be side by side because you're looking at a singular and a plural form of each first, second, and third persons, right? Entonces, aquí tenemos yo, our ending for our AR verbs. For the yo form, the I, right? I study, yo estudio, estudio. Now, a good thing is with our AR, ER, and our IR endings, our yo form is always going to be O. Yo, O, right? That makes it easy. Yo, O. Yo estudio. Okay? Now, typically for the to ending, you're going to involve some type of S, even in the past tense and the imperfect. You will usually see some type of S with the to form. Okay? So, tú estudias. Usted, él, ella, estudia. So that's our singular third person. He, she, or you formal, right? So it'd be to the you informal. Usted, él, ella would be estudia. Okay, and typically with our AR verbs, you're going to have some kind of A ending on our um, third person singular. Okay, then we go to the nosotros form, right? Nosotros estudiamos. Nosotros estudiamos. Okay, now with the typical endings, your nosotros form or your first person plural is going to be longer than other endings. It's going to be usually the longest ending. Maybe that's because it includes the most people, but it's going to be nosotros estudiamos. So we have o, as, a, amos, and then an. Ustedes, ellos, ellas estudian. That would be our third person plural. They or you all formal. Right? That would be you all study or they study. Estudian. So, o, as, a, amos, an. O, as, a, amos, an. Estudian. Estudiamos. Estudia. Estudias. Estudio. Okay? Do a conjugation like that with the verb practicar, another AR verb. Do one of those real quick in your head. What would be the yo form of practicar? Yo practico, muy bien. Tú practicas, usted, él, ella practica. Nosotros practicamos. Ustedes, ellos, ellas practican. Perfecto. So that for our regular AR verbs, which most of them are regular, this will be our endings. O, as, a, amos, an. Muy bien. So Juan Carlos estudia ciencias ambientales. So let me ask you, ¿qué estudias? ¿Qué estudias? ¿Qué estudias tú? What do you study? So how would you respond to that? Yo estudio ciencias políticas. I studied political science. I study Spanish. Yo estudio español. Yo estudio enfermería. Now, the good thing about the vocabulary for this chapter, a lot of these subject materials and classroom items are cognates, right? Geografía, geography. Matemáticas, mathematics. La física, physics. Las ciencias, sciences. Muchas de las palabras del vocabulario de este capítulo, de this chapter, son cognados, are cognates. So try and look for those similarities that you would see in the same English word as you do in the Spanish. All right, now, so to create the forms of most regular verbs in Spanish, okay, what we typically do to conjugate our verbs is we drop those infinitive endings, okay? As you can see back here, we are up to the AR of estudiar. So we take off our AR, then we add our endings. O, as, a, amos, an. Okay? Now, you're asking yourself, do we do this in English as well? Of course we do, right? I study, he studies, you study, we study, they study. Okay? So it's not as varied in English. However, we do have different conjugations for different subject pronouns. Think about the verb to be. I am, you are, he or she is. Okay, so we also conjugate our verbs in English, right? And we're not using the infinitive. We're using a form of that infinitive or from the base form of the verb. So we're going to take off, drop that infinitive ending, whether it's AR, ER, or IR, AR for this chapter. And then you then add the stem to the endings that correspond to the different subject pronouns. Okay, for example, estudiar, yo estudio. If you want to say you dance, tú bailas. If we want to say we work, nosotros trabajamos. Okay, so you see we've taken off our stem, our ending. We are left with the stem, then we add our ending for the appropriate subject pronoun. All right, now here are some common AR verbs, and let's just take a look through these and try to see if we can find some common ground or some cognates, maybe a way to remember these words. So what about bailar? What comes to your mind when you think of to dance with bailar? It looks like ballet, doesn't it? Bailar, to dance. Okay. Buscar, to look for. Make sure you're repeating after me on all these words. Buscar, to look for. Okay. Caminar, caminar, to walk. Cantar, cantar, to sing. It's like almost like chant, right? Cenar, to have dinner. Comprar, to buy. Comprar, to buy. Contestar, if you're a contestant, usually you're answering something. Conversar, to converse, to talk, to chat. Desayunar, okay, this is an interesting verb in Spanish because we say the same thing in English, right? Des means to break. Ayunar means to fast, so literally, to break the fast. Descansar, to rest. Descansar. Desear, to desire, to wish. It looks like a good cognate, right? Dibujar, dibujar, to draw. Enseñar, enseñar, to teach. Escuchar, to listen to. Esperar, to wait or to hope for. Estudiar, a good cognate, to study. Estudiar. Explicar, to explain. That's a good cognate. Hablar, hablar, to talk or to speak. Hablar. Llegar, llegar, to arrive. Llevar, to carry. Mirar, mirar, to look at or to watch. Necesitar, so something is a necessity, it's needed, right? Practicar, good cognate, practicar, to practice. Preguntar, if you have a pregunta, right? You would say, te pregunto, I ask you. Pregunto, si, I ask if. Preparar, to prepare, good cognate. Regresar, to return, make sure you're repeating. Regresar. Terminar, to terminate or to end or to finish, right? Good cognate. Tomar, to take or to drink, commonly used for both. Trabajar, to work. And then viajar, to travel. Looks like voyage almost. Viajar. Muy bien. Now, unless referring to a person, the Spanish verbs buscar, escuchar, esperar, and mirar do not need to be followed by prepositions as they do in English, okay? Busco la tarea. It's almost like it's included. We would say busco por, or I'm looking for, right? But that preposition is not needed in Spanish. Espero el autobús. You don't need to say I'm waiting for the bus. You just say I wait the bus. Or I listen the music. Escucho la música. I'm listening to the music. Escucho la música. Miro el profesor, or miro la pizarra. Now, if we were referring to me, though, you would say miro al profesor, a el profesor, to the professor, right? I'm watching the lecture. I'm watching the professor. Miro al profesor. We need that preposition there if we were referring to someone. But since we're talking about an inanimate object here, miro la pizarra. Miro la pizarra. I'm looking at the board. Okay, now English uses three sets of forms to talk about the present. We have the simple present. Okay, por ejemplo, tú estudias, you study. Okay, or Paco works, you study, Paco works. The present progressive, Paco is working, or Paco está trabajando, right? There is a present progressive in English and Spanish. It's not used as often as we use it in English, right? That's just say Paco is working. And then we have the emphatic present. Paco does work. Paco sí trabaja. Okay. Now in Spanish, the simple present can be used in all three of those cases to say the same thing. Paco trabaja en la cafetería. Paco works in the cafeteria. Paco is working in the cafeteria, or Paco does work in the cafeteria. And a lot of this is going to depend on context of what you mean, right? Because you can mean different things saying the same thing, but it's going to depend on context and intonation, or how you say it. In Spanish and English, the present tense is also sometimes used to express future action, right? For example, Mariana viaja, travels to Madrid tomorrow. A Madrid mañana. Mariana travels to Madrid tomorrow. Mariana will travel to Madrid tomorrow. Mariana is traveling to Madrid tomorrow. So suffice to say that with the present tense in Spanish, you can do a lot more than you can in the present tense in English, right? It can mean all three of these different things for the present, but also for the future. Okay, muy bien. Now, when two verbs are used together with no change of subject, The second verb is generally going to be in the infinitive. And we do the same thing in English, okay? So to make a sentence negative in Spanish, okay, the word no is placed before the conjugated verb, and then some cases it means not, right? All right, now let's go back to this first claim right here. When two verbs are used together with no change of subject, the second verb is generally in the infinitive, okay? Por ejemplo, deseo hablar. I want to speak, right? You don't say I speak, right? You say I desire or I want to speak. So that's why typically the conjugated verb, when followed by another verb, that verb will be usually in the infinitive form. Okay. Now we can also make a sentence negative by placing no in front of the conjugated verb. And that means not. Alicia no desea bailar ahora. Alicia does not want to dance right now. Again. Now, Spanish speakers often omit subject pronouns, okay? And we've talked about this briefly. But that's because the verb endings indicate who the subject is, okay? Now, there can be a little bit of confusion in the third person, okay? And if you go back and look at your chart of your subject pronouns, okay, look at the third person singular and plural. Usted, él, ella, 3 different options. Ustedes, ellos, ellas, 3 different options, okay? So often with the third person singular and plural forms of present tense verbs, you do include the subject pronoun. However, if you say estudio, you know to whom you are referring, right? You don't need to say I, because there's no confusion over who I is. I'm the one saying the sentence. Yo estudio or estudio. Tú estudias or estudias. Same thing, right? The subject pronoun is part of the conjugation of the verb. Estudiamos. If you say estudiamos, there's no confusion because you're saying we study. You can say nosotros estudiamos, but it's also included in the conjugation. The subject pronoun is included in the ending, in the conjugation. Muy bien. So all that to say that clarification can be needed, but in Spanish, subject pronouns are often used for emphasis, okay? Que enseñan. Now that could be a little confusing if you didn't have any context, but it's obviously these people are having a conversation. Que enseñan, what do they teach? Or what do you all teach if it was ustedes? Ella enseña arte y él enseña física. ¿Quién desea trabajar hoy? Who wants to work today? Yo no deseo trabajar hoy. Okay, so the emphasis right here in these sentences helps determine the person that you are referring to with your conjugation. Now, there's also another set of lecture notes that are below this, and it will include the verb gustar. So go ahead and open that other one. Make sure you're following along. So the verb gustar is different from other AR verbs, and we're going to get into this more and more throughout Spanish. But basically, what we are doing with the verb gustar is that we are using it with an indirect object pronoun, okay? And it's not functioning as the typical way to say it in English. I like the dog, right? That would be subject verb pronoun. But in Spanish, we're using subject verb indirect object, and the subject being the thing liked, right? Or in this case, doing the pleasing. So let's look at this. Gustar is different from other AR verbs, and to express your likes and dislikes, we use the expression no or no me gusta or me gusta plus el, la, and then a singular noun, right? Me gusta el perro. Me gusta el perro. Now, let's go and look at that in a different way on our whiteboard here. Okay, so if I'm saying me gusta el perro, all right, in English, we would say I like the dog. In Spanish, we would say me gusta el perro, okay? Now, if we look at the syntax or word order of this sentence, right? Let me spread these out a little bit. Okay, this would be our subject, right? I'm doing the liking. I'm doing the liking, so this is going to be the verb, right? And the direct object of the sentence would be the dog, right? I like what? I like the dog. Subject, verb, subject, verb, direct object. Now, the syntax for this same sentence is quite different in Spanish, okay? Because who is the subject of the sentence in this? It's the dog, okay? Now let's look at why that's the case. Okay, so that's going to be the subject. This is going to be the verb. And this is going to be the indirect object right here. The me is the indirect object. So the syntax is different. But what's happening here is that because we're saying the dog, it pleases me, right? The dog is pleasing to me, okay? And that's because we're using an indirect object here because the indirect object answers to whom or for whom an action is done, right? So the dog pleases who, right? Who is it being done for? Me, right? The dog is pleasing to me. So the verb is conjugated on the subject, yes, but usually on the thing that we would consider the direct object in our syntax in English, right? We say, I like the dog. In Spanish, they say, the dog pleases me, or the dog is pleasing to me, okay? And that's where we get the indirect object, to me, to whom? To me. Okay, I like what? I like the dog, subject, verb, direct object. In Spanish, it's indirect object, verb, subject. Okay, and we'll get into more of that. But here's another little quick example. Now, if we had a singular subject like el perro, we would need a singular third person conjugation for this verb, right? The dog, it is pleasing to me, right? It pleases me. Okay, remember, it can be included in that third person category, that third person conjugation. Now, if we had multiple dogs, because who doesn't like more than one dog, right? We would say los perros, all right? Now, what would we have to change here? Because in the first one it said, the dog, it pleases me, but the dogs, they please me. So we'd have to say, me gustan los perros. So when using this construction, the gustar construction, we're either conjugating in the third person singular or in the third person plural. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, moving on here. So let's look at a couple of these phrases. Me gusta la música clásica. Okay, classical music pleases me. Okay, singular subject here, even though in English that would be the direct object. I like classical music. I like what? I like classical music. But in Spanish, remember, we're reversing it and we're using an indirect object instead of a direct object. So the music pleases who? Pleases me. So la música me gusta. It's pleasing to me, right? And this can also be written out like this. A mí me gustan las artes. And that's just to show a little bit of emphasis. But essentially, this is what we're doing with this indirect object pronoun right here. We're replacing the phrase or the noun phrase, a mí, the prepositional phrase, which would be our indirect object, and we take a pronoun to make that shorter to me. But that's what we're doing here. We're answering to whom? To me. Me gustan las artes. So the arts, they are pleasing to me. And that's why we have a plural conjugation here. We have a plural noun, plural conjugation. Singular noun, singular conjugation. Because it's pleasing to whom? Now, if you wanted to say you like classical music, we would say te gusta la música clásica. Te gusta. Okay? Conjugation stays the same. The only thing that's being changed is that indirect object pronoun. Okay, here we get again, las clases de español y biología. We have las clases, plural noun, plural verb. Singular noun, el programa, singular verb, gusta. Now, to talk about what you like and don't like to do, you can say no me gusta or me gusta plus an infinitive. And that's what we've been talking about earlier, those verbs that end in AR, ER, or IR. And remember, we said when we have back-to-back verbs and the first one is conjugated, typically that second one is going to be followed by an infinitive. So in this sense, we're also going to look at this a little bit differently from our syntax in English, okay? So we would say, I don't like to travel by bus, okay? I don't like to sing and dance. Now, if we wanted to use that same syntax, you can say, I don't like to travel, or I don't like to sing and dance. That works. But another thing that's important to remember about infinitives is they can also function as nouns, okay? So like singing and dancing, each of those is pleasing to me. Now, one thing that's important here to remember is that when you use infinitives, even if you have a list of infinitives, the gusta is always going to be used. That singular form will always be used, even if you have multiple infinitives. Okay, and that's because it's saying singing and dancing, each of those pleases me. Traveling pleases me, right? And those, like I said, those infinitives can function as nouns. Okay, back to what I was just saying earlier. To ask a friend about likes and dislikes, you use the pronoun te instead of me. Okay, because we're replacing, instead of a mí, me, we're saying a ti, te, right? So we're replacing that a ti, to whom, which the indirect object answers, to whom or for whom an action is done. So we're going to replace it with te, right? A ti, te. Okay, so you may use a ti for emphasis, but never the subject pronoun tú. Okay, and that's because in the prepositional phrases, the object of the preposition is not the subject pronoun, right? It is going to be a different form. Very good. So you got someone, ¿te gusta la geografía? Good cognate. ¿Te gusta la geografía? Sí, me gusta. ¿Y a ti te gusta el inglés? No, no me gusta el inglés. So if you're going to respond to a question, first you would say no, and then you would negate the verb. No me gusta el inglés. Muy bien. Okay, now you can use the same structure to talk about other people by using the pronouns nos, le, and les. And we'll learn more about this in lesson 7, but you can essentially do the same thing. So nos would be us, right? That would be the first person plural indirect object pronoun. This would be the third person singular indirect object pronoun. And les would be the third person plural indirect object pronoun. But we'll get to that in lesson 7. All right, guys, so muy bien. Muchas gracias por estar aquí hoy. Make sure you get those notes followed and filled out, and please see the activity and the PowerPoint located below. Muchas gracias, adiós, y nos vemos pronto.